Shalom, welcome. Today we will be making challah bread. So some of the things that you're going to need a bowl. Of course, you're going to need flour. This is all-purpose flour. And we're going to be making some plain challah today. You're going to need some vegetable oil. It could be a clear oil like almond oil. Alternatively, you could use a stick of butter, which you'll want it to be softened to room temperature. Some sea salt, some yeast, and we're going to use dry yeast today. Maybe another day I'll talk about using wet yeast. You're going to need 2 eggs at least, and you're going to need some sugar. And alternatively, if you don't like using sugar, you could use you could use some honey. And we also have a water bottle that we're going to use as well for water. So these are the ingredients that you're going to need. The first step that we're going to do is we're going to pour our water bottle into our bowl. And you want to make sure your water is at least room temperature. You don't want it to be cold. Definitely not cold. Preferably warm. If you're pouring it from a tap, you could pour out about 2.5 cups of warm water. As you can see, I'm pouring out all of the yeast into my bowl. So I poured all the yeast into the bowl. And I'm just going to use my spoon. I'm just going to stir it around just a little bit. I have a wooden spoon here as well. And I'm going to let it sit for a few minutes. Okay, it's about 5 minutes later, and you can see that our water yeast mixture is murky. So that's about what we want it to be. And so what we're going to do now, we're going to put the other ingredients into it. So again, I said that we could either use honey or sugar. And today I'm going to use sugar. And I'm going to put about 2/3 of a cup of sugar in my bread. Now, the more sugar you put in a bread, the sweeter it's going to be. The less sugar you put in it, the less sweet it's going to be. These ingredients do not have to be exact. So I'm just going to put a little bit less than 2/3 in. I don't really like my bread to be too sweet. You're going to also want to put some salt in the bread. I'm going to put about 2 teaspoons of salt in here. These ingredients don't have to be exact, but you do want to put enough salt in to counteract the sugar that you put in. Now, I'm going to also use some vegetable oil today instead of butter. If you use butter, I use salted butter. And so if I use salted butter, I might put a little bit less salt into my bread. And if I use oil, I'm probably going to make sure I put enough salt in it to give the bread some flavor. So, again, salt is flavor in your bread. If you don't put any salt in your bread isn't going to have that much flavor. But at the same time, if you don't want to use that much salt because of maybe blood pressure or whatever health reasons you might have, you can forego the salt. Okay, so now we're going to have the eggs. So we're going to put 2 eggs in. Now, if you're vegan, you don't have to use eggs. Your bread will just be a little bit more biscuity. You could put 1 egg in if you're running short on eggs, or if you don't have that many eggs. You could put 3 eggs in. You could put 4 eggs in. Bread is basically yeast, water, and flour. So if you have those 3 ingredients, you're going to have bread. Your bread might have a different consistency depending on what you put in it. But you're going to have bread. So I'm just going to stir this around a little bit here. If you have a whisk, you can use a whisk to do this part. I don't have a whisk out here. I'm just going to stir this around. And so the next step is going to be to add our flour in. And flour is an interesting thing because if you put, there's no such thing as putting too much flour in your bread or too little flour in your bread. You always just have to counteract. If you put too much flour in, you add some water. If you don't put enough flour in, you would add some flour. So let's get our flour. And I'm going to start off with about 3 cups of flour. I'm going to start off with about 3 cups of flour. And I already know I'm going to need more than 3 cups of flour, but I'm just going to start off with this amount. Just stir it up some. Let's get our bread stirring. So eventually it's going to come to a point where I can't use my spoon. But right now we're at a point where it's pretty easy to stir. I'm going to just stir this up. And I'm going to put I'll put 3 cups in again. I'll put another 3 cups in. Okay. Well, now this is a lesson on the fact that it doesn't have to be exact. That didn't hurt anything, even though there's way more than 3 cups that went in here. Just means the process is going to be a little bit shorter for me. So I'm going to use this spoon until pretty much I can't use the spoon anymore. And you can see it's starting to get harder for me to stir. It's starting to get harder. Bread is a labor of love. It's a labor. You don't make bread without having a little bit of labor involved. And I can already tell that there was way too much flour that just spilled into my bowl. And then I'm going to need some more water because, as you can see, everything's really starting to come together. Okay, I got a little bit more water to add because of my little mistake there. And I am at the point where I'm ready to empty out my bread. Okay, I'm at a point where I'm ready to really work with my bread dough. It's really hard. I can't stir it anymore with my spoon. So I went and I got a pan and I put some flour on it. And I just made a bed of flour on my pan. So I'm taking it, and the thing about bread dough is that if you have flour on your hands, you can kind of work with the flour. You might want to take your rings off if you don't want your rings to get too floury. So what you're going to do is, now that your bread is in the flour, I'm just going to take it and I'm just going to kind of push it down a little bit in the flour. I'm going to add a little bit more flour to this. If you feel like it's sticking on your fingers some, you might want to add some more flour. When you're making bread, you should just have a bunch of flour on hand. And I'm just going to start punching it in a little bit. Just punching it down just a little bit. And you can kind of see the consistency of this. It's a little, it's malleable. It's not too flimsy, but at the same time, it's not too sticky to my fingers. You can kind of see my hands just sticking a little bit. I'm going to stand up here. That's another thing. A lot of times when you're making bread, you just got to stand up. I like to punch the bread in, like punch it down, punch it, flip it. When you flip it, you want to make sure you have flour underneath. Flip it, punch it some more. And so basically, you're just working all of the flour into the dough. You're just getting it to a point where you want it to look really smooth. You don't want any lumps in your bread dough. You want it to be smooth. You don't want it to be sticky. Those are the two things when I'm talking to people about making bread that I say you want. There's different ways that you can knead, but pretty much punching is a good way to do it. With your fists, your knuckles, flipping it over. And you can see that my dough is actually pretty much done. It's pretty ready. I've only been doing this for maybe less than 2 minutes now. So you can use your palms of your hands. You just really want to get it to a point where it's all coming together. It's all looking very consistent. It's not, there's no lumps. There's no, clumps in it. It's just very uniform. And it's soft and malleable. It's not too stiff. If it's too stiff, you want to go and you want to get some more water. I would say that this is about done. I mean, my hands, my fingers aren't sticking to it. This is about done. We are at a point where we are going to put our dough in a bowl to rise. And because my steel pan is still sticky, I'm going to use a clean bowl. You should always use a clean bowl for this process. And so I'm going to just put a little bit of oil in this bowl. And I'm just going to spread the oil around the bowl using a paper towel. This is so that as the bread dough rises, it won't have anything to hinder it, and there won't be any knots in your bread. If you use a bowl that has stuff on the sides, all of this stuff will be little knots in your bread that aren't really fully incorporated into the dough. And so this is my dough. I'm going to just set it in the bowl. It's already starting to rise a little bit. I'm going to set it in the bowl. I'm going to take a clean towel, a clean dish towel, and I'm going to put it over it. And I'm going to set it on a warm stove. And I'm going to set it on the stove for about an hour. And then I'll come back and we will braid our bread. Okay, it's an hour later. And our dough is about has risen about double the size. So it's about time for us to braid. Now you could let it go a little bit longer. You could punch this down. I'm punching it down. You could punch this down and you could let it rise again. But you could kind of see that it's very bouncy. And I'm actually doing this with unfloured hands, and the dough isn't sticking to my hands. So what you can do is, if you have a counter, you just spread some flour out on a counter. And you just take the dough out of the bowl. It should come out the bowl. We oiled the bowl. It should come out pretty clean. Now, at this state, we're going to actually take a piece of dough out. And if you do not take a piece of dough out of your bread, you can't really call it challah. You could call it braided bread. You could call it challah bread if you would like. But the piece of dough that you take out of the bread is actually the challah. This little piece of bread here, this little piece of dough, is the challah of the bread. And I'm going to read a scripture real quick to explain what I'm saying. Numbers 15 verses 17 through 21 says, "And Yahweh spake unto Moshe, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, and say unto them, When ye come into the land whither I bring you, then it shall be that when ye eat of the bread of the land, ye shall offer up a heave offering unto Yahweh. You shall offer up a cake of the first of your dough for a heave offering. As ye do the heave offering of the threshing floor, so ye shall heave it. Of the first of your dough you shall give unto Yahweh a heave offering in your generations." In Numbers 15 verse 20, where it says you shall offer up a cake, the word for cake is challah. So whenever you say challah bread, you're referring to a bread in which a piece of dough, the challah, was taken out. So it's actually a little bit inaccurate to call it bread that you eat the challah bread, because the piece of dough that's taken out is actually the challah. And so what I do whenever I take this piece of dough out, I offer up a prayer of thanksgiving to the Most High for all of the blessings of the previous week, and then I throw it away. So I'm going to put it to the side because I normally just throw it in the garbage, or some people burn it, wrap it up in aluminum foil and throw it away, but we don't partake of it. We don't eat it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to divide the dough in half first. Now, there's many ways to braid the challah bread, and I will probably have videos on different ways. But I'm just going to do a simple braid. This is a beginner video. And most people know how to do a 3-strand braid. So that's what we're just going to do. We're going to do a 3-strand braid. So I cut it in half, and I cut it in 3 parts. And then I'm just going to roll it in my fingers. Roll each strand. And I'm going to braid. How I'm going to braid it, I am going to start in the middle. That's the easiest way to do it. And I'm just going to braid like that, and then go to the top from the middle. And there you have it, a braid. I'm going to do that with the other one. This is a dough scraper. I got it from a little kitchen store. It's excellent because after you are done with actually baking bread, you can use it to scrape up all of the dough that's stuck to your counter. But if you don't have a dough scraper, you could just use a knife, or you could just break it with your hands. So it might take a little bit of time to get used to braiding bread, but if you do it every week, it's easy. You just do it real quick. I have a cookie sheet that I put some aluminum foil down. Alternatively, you could use parchment paper. And parchment paper is actually better because if you use parchment paper, you don't have to grease the parchment. Since I'm using aluminum foil, I'm going to take a little bit of oil. I'm going to just grease it so it doesn't stick. And I'm going to put my bread on it lengthwise, my 2 braids. You want a nice size cookie sheet just so that there's enough room for the bread to rise. The next step, which is going to be our final step, is we're going to add a little bit of shine to our bread. We could put it in the oven like this, but when it comes out, it'll be dull. So I have an egg here, just an egg, and I have a pastry brush. You could get these from the Dollar Tree for $1. I have little red ones in there. I'm just mixing the egg. If you are vegan, you can use maple syrup for this. I'd put a little bit of maple syrup in a bowl and just a little bit of water maybe in there. And I would just stir it up just like I'm doing this. And it'll work exactly the same way as an egg. I've done that several times when I have been vegan or gone on different vegan diets. So I'm just going to brush the bread. This doesn't have to be super fancy. You just want to, if you don't have a brush, you could use a paper towel. You could even use your hands just to get the egg wash or the maple syrup if you're vegan across the bread, just to give it a little shine. Now, if you wanted to add any type of sesame seeds or anything, this would be the time you'd add that. But I don't normally do that. I normally just make plain challah. So now it's ready to go in the oven at 325 for 25 minutes. And we will know when it's done because when you hit the bottom of it, you should be able to kind of hear a hollow sound. Okay, it's been 25 minutes at 325 degrees, and this is what the bread looks like. And I can when I pat it, you can kind of hear a hollow sound that comes from it, which means that the bread is done. And that's how you make challah bread.